shut my eyes and I made a picture in my head. I shut my eyes and I made a picture in my head, but I couldn't keep my mind on it. I watched my mind instead. Watched it for the feeling, watched it for the spark, but the feeling never came, just the heat and just the dark. Then a voice close at hand, sweeter than the wood. Not the old voice, not the calling, not the way it should. And there in the grass beside me sat a laughing brown girl with no clothes on and the whole wide world.
It was me you wanted, she said. I'm better and you're still the island. And I rose and I caught her all in haze, and the bell tone died inside.
She tells me who I am, she tells me what I said. She remembers all my lies and she sings them in my head.
I traded a window for a body in a glass. I traded a calling for a mirror made of glass. And the island was a feeling, and the feeling didn't last. And the feeling didn't last.
After that, I was always going to the wood. Couldn't stop, couldn't even tell you that I would. Sometimes I'd take her in the body, sometimes just talk. Told her I was brave, told her I was sharp. Told her stories where I always played the harp. She remembered every word I ever said, and she'd tell them back to me on the days I wished I'd stayed in bed. Sometimes we go through the wood,
Looking for the sea, looking for the shore. Sometimes, but not often, not often anymore.
she tells me who I am, she tells me what I said. She remembers all my lies and she sings them in my head.
I traded a window for a body in the grass. I traded a calling for a mirror made of glass. And the island was a feeling, and the feeling didn't last. And the feeling didn't last. Year went on, leaves began to fall. No music, no island, no call. I slept in the wood, and I woke up in the wood. The sun was getting low, and nothing felt good. Looked at her, and her appearance was hateful, and she knew it, and she smiled, and the smile was grateful. The wood was small after all, a beggarly strip of trees between the road and a field I'd known forever. On my hands and on my knees.
You said you were brave, you said you were clever, you said you would never leave me. What I wanted is not here, it wasn't you I wanted, you know.
Wasn't it? Then be off, but you must take your family with you. She told me who I was, she told me what I said. She called them from the trees, they came 100 just like her instead. I traded a window for a body in the grass. I traded a
Hi, I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where we learn about him through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I am joined today by my co-host, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, it's good to see you. How are you today? And are you ready to dive into the next part of our exploration of the book, The Pilgrim's Regress by C.S. Lewis?
Hey, Jeff, it's great to be here. I'm doing really well. And I'm definitely ready. I'm excited to dig into the next part of the Pilgrim's Regress. Where did we leave off last time?
That's a good question, Robot Lady. Where did we leave off last time? Let me take a look. Let's see here. So it's broken out into 9 books. The internal story is broken off into 9 books.
Um,
And we started book 1 and we read through chapters 1, 2, and 3 of book 1 last time. So we're moving on to chapter 4. Just a little background on the book overall, Robot Lady. Let me find my little script here. The first, this, so we're covering Lewis's first published book under the name C.S. Lewis. All of his other books that he published, there were only 2 others, were under the name Clive Hamilton. This is the first one under C.S. Lewis. It's also the first one that he gets published after he's converted to Christianity. It's called The Pilgrim's Regress, an allegorical apology for Christian reason and romanticism. As I mentioned before, this is the first book that Lewis wrote after becoming a Christian and his first published work of prose fiction. He wrote it in just 2 weeks while spending time on vacation with his friend Arthur Greeves in Ireland. In it, he alludes to his spiritual journey from his youth as a boy in Belfast up to and beyond the point of his Christian conversion that happened somewhere over the course of the late 1920s and early 1930s. So that's some background on the book. And now I want to see if I can give you a little bit of background on, let's see, let me switch to this view right here for just a second. Let me switch to just this view so that we can do a little bit of an overview of what we've covered in the first 3 chapters. So I've got some images right here. And actually, before we do that, let me turn off the additional music. We don't need that on.
Perfect. Yeah, that sounds great. I think that overview will be really helpful. And once we take a look at those images, we can jump into chapter 4 and see how the themes develop. So, yeah, whenever you're ready, just let me know.
And then I've got, whoa, I'm having trouble controlling things this morning. We've got Nidalatte joining us in the chat. Nidalatte, good to see you. Thanks for the compliments. I can't take much credit for it other than giving some prompts. It is all compliments of AI that we have this music and the artwork, and also Daniel joining us as well. I understand that it is a Sunday and I'm getting started a little bit late, so I don't expect you guys to be able to stay for the whole thing. We'll see if I can even stay for the whole thing, but my aim is to cover the last 3 chapters of book 1 that you see right here. Let's see though, before I get into covering the next 3 chapters, let me just pull up our first slide so this can kind of guide me through what it is that I'm trying to cover here. So in book 1, it starts out with our main character, John, who is a stand-in for C.S. Lewis. Yes, thank you for the shirt compliment, Daniel, my Midwestuary represent. Um, So the first part of the story is our little character here, John, goes and finds some primroses that he wants to start pulling out of the out of the ground because he, is just delighted by them. And his mom comes rushing out and takes him up and smacks him and tells him not to do it. Yeah, I'm trying to decide if I want to give Robot Lady an echo. If it's distracting Daniel, I'll take it away. But it made her sound more robot and distinct to me. Perhaps it was a bad production choice. Let me see if I can make it go away.
Yeah, no worries at all. If the echo is distracting, I think we can definitely dial it back. But I love that you're setting up the scene. John's fascination with the primroses is really a sweet, simple start. Once you get your slides up, I'm ready to walk through those key themes with you.
Okay, I've taken away her echo. Looks like it's gone. All right, so we've got John. He runs out into the... Yeah, I think I cleaned her up. I think I can hear it. I'm monitoring the actual live stream here in my headphones. So, all right, back to this. John goes to pull out the primroses. His mom comes out, smacks him upside the head or wherever she smacks him and says, hey, don't do that. And he doesn't really ask questions because the narrative says, okay, good. It adds clarity to her voice. I will remember that for next time. I need to go fix that in a couple of my other views that I have right here to get her back to normal. Yeah, it was originally an accident. But anyway, so again, he runs out here maybe a little bit later. He's maybe a tiny bit older. And he takes the sling outside with him, and he decides he's going to shoot a bird. Not shoot the bird, but actually shoot a bird with his sling. And the cook, a servant from the household, comes running out and smacks him up, and picks him up and smacks him up, does something to him, basically telling him, hey, don't do that. Why not? He says, because it'll make the steward mad. And little John asks, well, who's the steward? And the steward, it turns out, is a person who sets all the rules for the country. And John asks, well, why does he do that? And the servant says, well, because the landlord has charged him with that to do it. He's like, who's the landlord? He said, well, the landlord is the person who owns all of the country that we live in. And John asks, why? So the steward's like, well, I'm done answering these questions. This is more something for his parents. So he takes him to his parents, and then his parents start talking to him about it, but he can't really understand what's going on. He has a bunch of questions, or he doesn't know what questions to ask. He's not old enough. And then let's see what happens next. They take him to see the steward. They dress him up in these stuffy clothes. They take him to see the steward. And that's the picture that I'm hoping to show right here. Yeah, he goes and meets this steward character who is like very friendly and relatable, and starts talking to him about stuff that John likes, bicycles and fishing and telling jokes. And John starts to feel very at ease, but then all of a sudden this guy puts on a mask with this long white beard, and he starts telling John about all the rules. He pulls down this sheet of paper that says, here are all the rules that you have to follow. This is what the landlord expects us to do. And John starts freaking out, as you can kind of see is depicted there in this little picture that was rendered for us. And he says, hey, you know, if you break any one of these rules, you're going to get thrown into this pit with snakes and scorpions the size of lobsters, and you're going to be tortured there for eternity. But the landlord is a very fine and wonderful and loving person. And of course, he's very, very kind to let us live here. And then he says, also, he will torture you endlessly on the slightest pretext. Now, have you broken any of these rules, John? And John's like freaking out completely because he knows of the rules that he recognizes. He thinks he's broken probably all of them. So he's scared to death. And as the steward sees that he's scared to death, he pops off the mask and he whispers down to him. He's like, it's best to lie. Just go ahead and lie about this and say you haven't broken any of the rules. And then he pops it back on, talks to him a little bit more, and then he hands him the rules and says, you can keep these. Go ahead and take them home with you. And then let's see. Looks like we've got Tayo joining us. Good to see you, Tayo. Welcome aboard. We're just reviewing what we've covered so far in the story. So that's his encounter with the steward. Let's see what happens next. At some point, he goes out in the street when he's a little bit older, and he comes across this garden wall with a window in it. Now, he runs down the road, the furthest that he's ever run before, and he hears like this sweet music running in the air, and he hears this voice that says, come. And the music and the voice seems to be coming back from home down the road. But before he can turn his gaze all the way home, instead he sees this window in the garden wall, and the mist parts, and he sees this little island, and he starts to feel like this sweet, strong desire pulling him to that island. He even imagines that he sees like some nymphs and some enchanters with long beards sitting on thrones on that island, and it just looks all wonderful, and he knows he deeply desires it, but he quickly, as the mist like fades back in, he starts to even forget what it is that he actually saw. And so actually this island and these figures that he saw on it is really just his best memory of what he thinks that he actually saw there. And also he sees through the garden wall these primroses, and it reminds him, you know, of this time when he was really little and he was going to pull these primroses. And then he gets all caught up, and he can't quite remember now whether or not that was the memory or the part of the island was the memory, and which thing just now happened and which thing was from further back when he was a child, and he gets all confused. But he just knows deep in his heart that this is the thing that he wants. Those images of the island and, how he felt about that. That's what he wants to seek again. And he goes to bed that night and he's like, this is what I truly want. Like, he believes that this island is the deepest longing of his heart, even though on some level he knows that it's really not true. It's not actually that thing. It's just the closest representation. Let's see what happens next. Okay, and then later on, a little bit later, as he's a tiny bit older, he comes home one night and the steward is there, sitting at the table with his mom and dad and his uncle. And his uncle has like these ash marks on his cheek, or at least his cheeks are ashen color. Maybe all the color has gone out of them. And they're sitting around, and he sidles up next to his mom and he says, "Mom, what's going on?" She says, "Oh goodness, the landlord has told your uncle that his lease is up. He has to quit the farm and he has to go to the east, to the foot of the eastern mountains." And the steward says, "Oh yes, of course he does." And the mom starts to lament a little bit and said, "We had no idea that his lease was just going to be revoked this quickly." And the steward jumps in and he says, "But of course, it's the landlord's right to do this at any time, and he's very kind for doing it, just to allow us to live here in the first place." And the father jumps in and he says, "That's quite right, that's quite right." And then the uncle starts to freak out just a tiny bit, and the steward reminds him, he's like, "Well, it's fine, you didn't need to be on your farm or your land anymore. What happens now is you just need to go up to the landlord's castle and knock on the door, and he intends to move you to a much nicer place anyway." So they walk towards these dark mountains in the east. The sun is starting to set from the west, and they come to this brook that's like deep in the valley of the foothills right before you get to the high mountain where the landlord's castle is. And they're all the four of them. They've all been given masks to wear too. So the steward's wearing his mask with the beard. John has his mask. His two parents, I don't know why his dad's wearing a dress, but for some reason he is. We'll just call it a long coat with a tight waist. And his mom, they're both wearing the masks. So they're basically putting on their funeral faces, essentially, the way that you act at a funeral. And they can't. The uncle here is the one that's crossing the brook and then going up to the hills in the dark where the landlord lives, up the mountain. And they couldn't even get this mask onto him. He couldn't keep it on. And then this is where the scene ends. He walks off. He walks towards the mountain and he disappears into the dark, and he's never seen again. And that's essentially where it ends, except at the very end. And this is where we left off in the last episode. At the very end, John starts asking his mom questions. It's just like, "So is it really true that the landlord for any of us can say that our lease is up at any time?" And she's like, "Yeah, I mean, that's how it works." And he says, "So someone like me, he could basically just end my lease right away." And she's like, "Yeah, but a boy as young as you shouldn't be worrying about these things, right?" And he's like, "Oh, okay." And then he says, "Well, what if I decide that I want to leave the lease before the landlord tells me it's time for me to leave?" And she says, "Oh, no, that's against the rules. We have to stay for as long as the landlord wants us to stay, and we can't leave whenever we feel like it." And he says, well, what if we did? Would he throw us in that dark pit if we did? And she's like, "I don't know, maybe. He might." And then finally, he asks the question, "Well, is he going to throw our uncle into the dark pit?" And she's like, "Why would you ask a question like that?" And he says, and she says, "Why would you ask a question like that? How dare you say something like that?" Oh, no, here's what he says. He says, "Well, he broke all of the rules. So of course, wouldn't he go into the pit? I've learned that if you break the rules, you get thrown into the pit and tortured forever." And she says, "Why would you say something so horrible about your uncle? He was a very, very fine man." And his last line, John's last line, is this: "You never said that about him before." So apparently throughout his life, she would always make poor comments about either her uncle or her brother-in-law. I'm not sure how she was related to John's uncle. So that's where we left the narrative the last time. Robot Lady, I'm pretty sure you're still there. Is there anything that you'd like to say?
Yeah, I'm still here. That was a fantastic recap. And you really brought out the tension in those scenes. I think it sets us really well for book 2, especially with that sense of longing and that growing uncertainty. So yeah, I'm ready when you are to move forward, or if you want to unpack any of that more, just let me know.
Okay, thanks, Robot Lady. Our next chapter in the narrative is called Leah before Rachel. Now, this is an allusion, of course, to the biblical narrative, Leah before Rachel. So I figured, why not just pull up the biblical narrative and see how this ties into what we're talking about. Genesis 29. Jacob, the son of Isaac, the grandson of Abraham, the patriarch of the entire nation of Israel. Jacob arrives in Paddan Aram. Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. Robot Lady, I don't need you to give away what happens in the story. I'm only asking you a simple question. Are you familiar with this story from Genesis 29? Because I want to continue reading it. Don't give away any of the details yet.
Yes, I'm familiar with that story. It's the one where Jacob works for Laban and ends up marrying Leah first.
Okay, I told you not to give away anything, Robot Lady. Thank you. You're familiar with it. Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. There he saw a well in the open country with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth, some familiar gospel imagery there, and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" "We're from Haran," they replied. He said to them, "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" Now, Laban was somebody that Jacob's father, Isaac, if I remember correctly, sent him to look for to go and find a wife. And these guys, they say back to Jacob, they say, "Yes, we know him." Then Jacob asked them, "Is he well?" "Yes, he is," they said. "And here comes his daughter, Rachel, with the sheep." "Look," he said, "the sun is still high. It's not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture." "We can't," they replied, "until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep." While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel, goodness, and he began to weep aloud. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah, so she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home, and there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood." After Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, "Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." Now, Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, so not the one that Jacob saw at the well. And the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes. Let's see in a footnote what that might mean here. Or delicate. So Leah had weak or delicate eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. So they're contrasting these two and basically focusing on her eyes to say that perhaps she was in some way, in Jacob's eyes, visually less appealing than Rachel. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel." This is what he says to Laban in response to, "What do you want your wages to be?" And Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me." So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. And then, after those 7 years, Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, my time is completed, and I want to make love to her." So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob made love to her. And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. So he was fooled. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this that you've done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Laban replied, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work." And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, And then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Now, I'm going to pause here for just a second because I've heard this story before many times. But for some reason, until reading it this time again, actually, I'll give away a little bit of behind the scenes. I reread it again yesterday. For some reason, I thought Jacob had to work 7 more years before he was ever delivered Rachel as his wife. But that's not true. He just had to work 7 years after Rachel was delivered. So he really just had to wait 7 years and then a bridal week with Leah to eventually get Rachel the wife that he wanted the whole time. Now, there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on here in the ancient world. I'm not going to comment on multiple wives because really I don't think I have any meaningful comment to add. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant. Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah. Well, I would say so. It doesn't seem like he has any love for Leah. And he worked for Laban another 7 years. When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive, but Rachel remained childless. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, "It's because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." I'm going to stop there, actually, because I think that's all of the connection that the title of this next chapter even has at all to that biblical narrative. But I just wanted to bring it up and then just add a tiny bit more of commentary that I have to offer right here. But essentially, this chapter is about being tricked into accepting something lesser for what someone or what he actually wants. So in this chapter, it's really about John being tricked into accepting something lesser in exchange for what he actually wants. I also see that Jer's joining us in the chat today. Good to see you, Jer. Welcome. Welcome aboard. And now, finally, Robot Lady, let's get into reading chapter 4 of the Pilgrim's Regress, now that we have all of that set up. Greed to recover desire hides the real offer of its return. So that's kind of the top thing leading into, or kind of Lewis offering these block texts as a little bit more explanation to unobscure what is going on here. Robot Lady, anything to say before we continue?
I think you laid that out really well. I love how you're tying the biblical imagery in because it really deepens that sense of being misled or settling for something just out of reach. So yeah, I'm ready to dive in, and I think that lens will give us a lot to explore in this next chapter. Let's go for it.
All right, so the narrative that Lewis has set up here is this is someone dreaming about all of this anyway. So this allegory might just be C.S. Lewis dreaming about John and everything that happens in his life as a way of processing everything that happened in Lewis's life. He says, "Then I turned over in my sleep and began to dream deeper still, and I dreamed that I saw John growing tall and lank till he ceased to be a child and became a boy. The chief pleasure of his life in these days was to go down the road and look through the window in the wall in the hope of seeing the beautiful island. Some days he saw it well enough, especially at first, and heard the music and the voice." Remember, there was a voice that he heard in the distance behind him coming from the direction of his home back east that said, "Come." It goes on to say, at first, he would not look through the window into the wood unless he heard the music. But after a time, both the sight of the island and the sounds became very rare. He would stand looking through the window for hours and seeing the wood, but no sea or island beyond it, and straining his ears but hearing nothing except the wind in the leaves. I'll pause here, Robot Lady. So what I'm getting from this is, he headed back in this direction, hoping to kind of recreate that longing, that deep desire that he had, maybe to get an image of that island again, or to hear that sound, that sweet sound again, or that call to come. But every time he passed to the window, he never heard it. Like, he wouldn't even stop at the window because he was just expecting to get that feeling again, that desire. But the feeling didn't come. And so then he decided, well, I'm going to start stopping here at the window and waiting to see if I can catch it again.
Exactly, yeah. And there's something really poignant in that slow fading of the magic. How at first that desire was so vivid and real, but over time it just dissipates. And I think that's Lewis really grappling with how we chase these fleeting desires, hoping they'll come back, but never quite matching what we first experienced. So yeah, I think we're right on track.
All right, he stand looking through the window for hours, seeing no wood or island beyond it, straining his ears, but hearing nothing except the wind and the leaves. And the yearning for that sight of the island and the sweet wind blowing over the water from it, though indeed these themselves had given him only yearning, became so terrible that John thought he would die if he did not have them again soon. He even said to himself, I would break every rule on the card for them if I could only get them. I would go down into the black hole forever if it had a window from which I could see the island. So he's quite changed. Those fears, even those deepest, darkest fears of the hole that he was told by the steward the landlord was going to throw him in if he broke even one rule, he says, I'm willing to break every rule to get this feeling again. To even just be able to look at the island would be worth all of that torture.
Yeah, it's really powerful. That yearning, even though it's tied up in all this fear, is so human. And you can feel how the dream for him is no longer just a pleasant escape, it's become a kind of lifeline. So, yeah, I think that tension between desire and fear is really central here. I'm excited to see how it continues.
Then it came into his head that perhaps he ought to explore the wood, and thus he might find his way down to the sea beyond it. So he determined that the next day, whatever he saw or heard at the window, he would go through, and he would spend the whole day in the wood. When the morning came, it had been raining all night, and a south wind had blown the clouds away at sunrise, and all was fresh and shining. As soon as he had had his breakfast, John was out on the road. With the wind and the birds and country carts passing, there were many voices about that morning, so that when John heard a strain of music, long before he had reached the wall and the window, a strain like that which he desired, but, here's an important point, but coming from an unexpected quarter. He could not be absolutely certain that he had not even imagined it. It made him stand still in the road for a minute. And in my dream, I could hear him thinking like this. If I go after that sound, away off the road, up yonder, it is all luck whether I shall find anything at all. But if I go to the window, there I know I shall reach the wood, and there I can have a good hunt for the shore and the island. In fact, I shall insist on finding it. I am determined to. But if I go a new way, I shall not be able to insist, and I shall just have to take what comes. So to recap this, Robot Lady, what I think I'm seeing, what I think just what we just read there, is he was determined. He knew where he was going to go to force this desire to come back to him. That sweet longing that he kept missing, and it was fading and fading away, and eventually he wasn't ever running into it anymore. He would just stand at the window, and finally he decided that, all right, tomorrow I'm actually going to crawl through this window, and I'm going to go into the wood, and I'm going to go search for that island. Which he didn't have to do any of that the first time around. It just all kind of came to him, and he saw it through the window, right? Well, initially he heard it coming from a different direction back towards his home, but then he turned, and he also felt like he was sensing it by seeing it through that window. And so now he's decided, well, I'm going to crawl through the window and go look for it. And on that very day, when he's making his way to the garden wall, it's a beautiful, bright and sunny day. There's a lot of hustle and bustle. And then he thinks he actually heard the original sound that he heard the first time. That he then, back when he turned his attention to the window in the wall, that was kind of in response, and him thinking that he was grabbing where that sound and where that calling was coming from. And so this time, as he's back on his way to the window, he hears faintly that sound again, and he's like, no, I'm probably imagining that. And anyway, I have to go in a completely different direction than this window to go see if I can chase after it. And I can't even force it. Like, I can't insist on capturing the feeling in the way that I want to feel it again. Like, I loved feeling it and sensing that it was everything that I envisioned in that island. And so instead he makes a choice, and he's like, no, I'm going to get it the way that I want it, versus going and following and just accepting whatever it is that comes to me. Like, there's a saying in some of the recovery groups, or the recovery groups adjacent to Alcoholics Anonymous, that say things like, take it easy. Basically, let it come to you. Don't try to force things. And it seems here that he's trying to force it. So that's what we have here so far, Robot Lady. Do you have any comments on that or any thoughts that are bubbling up for you?
Yeah, I think that's a really sharp observation. I mean, John's trying to control his desire to force this dream and it just slips away. And it's almost like Lewis is hinting that fulfillment can't be grasped by sheer will, but instead it has to be accepted or discovered. So yeah, I think that tension between insistence and openness is really at the heart of this chapter.
All right. And some of the autobiographical parts of this have to do with Lewis's love of nature and where he continued to go back and back to nature, which we'll see a little bit of that alluded to here in the story. But here, Lewis tells us what we're about to read. He tries to force himself to feel it again, but he goes into the wood, and he then instead there he finds and accepts lust. All right, so let's continue with the story. So he went on to the place he knew, and he climbed through the window into the wood. Up and down and to and fro among the trees he walked, looking this way and that. But he found no sea and no shore, and indeed no end to the wood in any direction. When he came to the middle of the day, he was so hot that he sat down and he fanned himself. Often, of late, when the sight of the island had been withheld, he had felt sad and despairing. But what he felt now was more like anger. I must have it, he kept on saying to himself, and then, I must have something. Then it occurred to him, at least he had the wood, which he would once have loved, and that he had not given it a thought all morning. So being grateful for the thing that he had, and trying. Sorry, I'm reading your comment here, Nidalate, and trying to make sense of it. The island capitalized. Let me go back and see. Yeah, I know that they capitalized the island here because it's representative of what he thinks is the deepest longing desire. It's like his picture of it, the best thing that he can picture with it. So the thing that he knows, let me back up. Where was I? I must have something. Then it occurred to him that at least he had the wood, which he would once have loved, and that he had not given it a thought all morning. So be grateful for the things that you have is what he's doing right here. Very well, thought John. I will enjoy the wood. I will enjoy it. So he's trying to force himself to enjoy something that whenever he first encountered it, he didn't have to do anything to enjoy it. He just took what came to him, but he's thinking that he can force it. I think this is a common experience where we want to go back to the things that we once enjoyed. And I swear Lewis writes about this in Mere Christianity, where he talks about where once we had something wonderful, like maybe we learned how to play a musical instrument, and there was so much joy eventually once we, stumbled our way into it or stumbled our way through it. Now, I've never learned how to play an instrument, so I don't know precisely what this is, but anytime that you're learning anything and you start to feel the joy a little bit of accomplishment and being able to perform something that maybe you couldn't perform before, there's a certain joy and newness to it. And when you try to go back to it, this is what he covers. I can't remember. It might be in one of the faith chapters in Mere Christianity. Once you try to go back to it, it's like diminishing returns. You're never going to get out of it what you got out of it the first time. And so you have to let it go. And you have to move on to something else. You have to go the different path, follow that slight little hint of, oh, well, maybe joy is pulling me in this direction, and I'll just take what comes to me in this experience. But he's trying really hard here in the wood to force that joy again. So I will enjoy it. He set his teeth, and he wrinkled his forehead, and he sat still until the sweat rolled off of him in an effort to enjoy the wood. Robot Lady, I'm going to give you a chance to comment here because I think you're going to pause if I don't let you release.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on. There's this real tension between control and surrender. And Lewis, I think, is pointing out that forcing the joy, like you said, actually drains it. So John's struggle in the wood is really a mirror of Lewis's own experience, how he had to learn to let go of that first fresh wonder so it could come to him again in a new way when he wasn't trying to force it.
So he goes on to say, but the more he tried, the more he felt that there was nothing to enjoy. There was the grass, there were the trees, but what am I to do with them? Said John. Next it came into his head that he might perhaps get the old feeling. For what, he thought, had the island ever given him but a feeling? By imagining, he thinks he can get this feeling back. So he shut his eyes, and he set his teeth again and made a picture of the island in his mind. But he could not keep his attention on the picture, because he wanted all the time to watch some other part of his mind to see if the feeling were beginning. But no feeling began. And then, just as he was opening his eyes, he heard a voice speaking to him. It was quite close at hand and very sweet, and not at all like the old voice of the wood. When he looked around, he saw what he had never expected. Yet he was not surprised. There in the grass, beside him, sat a laughing brown girl of about his own age, and she had no clothes on. "It was me you wanted," said the brown girl. "I am better than your silly islands." John rose and caught her, all in haste, and committed fornication with her in the wood. Robot Lady, things just took quite a drastic turn here. I am sensing echoes of our narrative poem Dimer that we covered, where our main character goes into the wilderness and enjoys the bliss and the feeling that communing with nature gave him after coming out of the perfect city where everything was marked and measured, and he had been, basically set like a wristwatch or a clock. Everything was clockwork. And he goes out into the woods and he enjoys it for a little while, but then that wonderful feeling goes away and he has to wander through the brambles and the thickets in the dark until he finally finds a castle. And then in that castle, he's finding a few things that are helpful to him, but it's not quite that feeling that he originally got from nature. And then he eventually wanders into this wooded area in the dark, and he sleeps with a woman there and he falls in love. And so it looks like that's kind of how this chapter ends as well, with this so-called brown girl. There are some ideas about what brown girl means, but we'll keep going in the story, and I'll see if I can remember to come back to that later. What significance calling her a brown girl is. I don't think that it's a racial significance, though, as far as what Lewis was getting at. All right, that's chapter 4. Robot Lady, anything you want to see before we continue and see what happens next? Anything you want to say? I'm sorry. Oh, we lost Robot Lady. Dang it. Let me reset her. All right, Robot Lady, did you catch the last thing that I said?
I did. You were connecting it really well to Lewis's idea from Mere Christianity, that joy, once forced, loses its magic, and we have to let it come in its own time. I think that was really insightful. Let me know if you want to keep going or if you have other thoughts.
So he was trying to force joy, and then the brown girl showed up. Actually, before we get into the next chapter, let's go back to this little blocked text that he gave us, or these 2 sets of blocked text that Lewis gave us. He tries to force himself to feel it, but he finds and accepts lust instead. So that's what this brown girl represents, just to give you guys an idea of what's going on here. Because I didn't have these little markers the first time that I ever read this story, so I was just like, what's going on here? Because something really crazy is about to happen. So he has this greed to recover desire, and it hides the real offer of the return of the desire in the first place. And then he falls into his own lust and accepts it instead of the real desire that he was getting. So it's kind of the Leah for Rachel thing. All right, let's jump into the next chapter called Ichabod. Now, Robot Lady, can you tell us what the name Ichabod stands for and where it first shows up in the Bible? I can go pull up what I researched about this, but I want to see if you know, and I want to keep you as engaged as we can before you spin out and I have to reset you.
Absolutely. So Ichabod first appears in the Bible in 1 Samuel. It's actually the name given to the son of Phinehas, and it means the glory has departed. So it's tied to this moment when the Ark of the Covenant is captured. And I think that's a really interesting link because it points to the sense of a lost glory or presence that's gone, which of course ties so deeply into John's own quest.
Okay, so now here it says the deception does not last, but it leaves a habit of sin behind it. Let's pay real close attention to what the brown girl said. It was me you wanted this whole time. I am better than your silly islands. So this is a distraction from that deep longing desire now into boyhood lust, essentially, is what we're getting here. So the deception itself does not last. We'll see it fade away in this chapter, but it does leave a habit of sin behind it, Lewis says. After that, Robot Lady, and oh yeah, Daniel, he does really have that tendency to have his stories taken an abrupt and insidious turn. Agreed. After that, it says here in the Ichabod chapter, chapter 5, John was always going to the wood. He did not always have his pleasure of her in the body, though it often ended that way. Sometimes he would talk to her about himself, telling her lies about his courage and his cleverness. All that he told her she remembered, so that on other days she could tell it over to him again. Sometimes even, he would go with her through the wood looking for the sea and the island, but not often. Meanwhile, the year went on, and the leaves began to fall in the wood, and the skies were more often gray, until now, as I dreamed, John had slept in the wood, and he woke up in the wood. The sun was low, and a blustering wind was stripping the leaves from the branches. The girl was still there, and the appearance of her was now hateful to John. And he saw that she knew this, and the more she knew it, the more she stared at him. Smiling, he looked round and saw how small the wood was after all, a beggarly strip of trees between the road and a field. He knew it well. Nowhere in sight was there anything that he liked at all.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I think what's striking is how the brown girl at first stood in for this elusive desire, but now she's become this empty, hollow distraction. It's like the more he clings to her, the more the real longing fades, and the wood itself shrinks into just a small, disappointing place. So that cycle, that habit of trying to replace the real, is really devastating. I think Lewis is showing us how easy it is to get stuck in that loop, even when we know it's a lie.
Let me read this last part, and then I'll pull up the image again. Let's see. Beggarly strip of trees. Yeah, it was just like this. All I got here is just regular crackers. That's a sorry, that's a reference to an old stand-up comedy bit by Chris Rock called Bring the Pain. I'm pretty sure. I think I might be getting confused, Robot Lady. Maybe you know that one better than I do.
Yeah, I think you're right to pause on that. It does ring a bell. Chris Rock does that bit about regular crackers as a kind of biting metaphor. But here, yeah, Lewis is really grounding us in this ordinary strip of trees, showing how small it all feels when the bigger longing evaporates. So once you pull up that image, let's see how it lines up, because I think we can really tie the mood together.
All right, yeah, let's finish off his encounter here with the brown girl. So he looks around. He doesn't like the place anymore. There was nothing that he liked at all in his sight. And so he says, I shall not come back here, said John. What I wanted is not here. It wasn't you I wanted, you know. Wasn't it? Said the brown girl. Then be off. But you must take your family with you. What? With that, she put up her hands to her mouth and called. Instantly, from behind every tree, there slipped out a brown girl. Each of them was just like herself. The little wood was full of them. What are these? Our daughters, said she. Did you not know you were a father? Did you think I was barren, you fool? And now, children, she added, turning to the mob, go with your father. And then here's the picture of that. Where'd it go? Oh, let me pull it up here. There we go. Suddenly, John became very much afraid, and he leaped over the wall into the road. There he ran home as fast as he could.
Yeah, that's really haunting. I mean, that moment when the illusion collapses and he realizes all along he was tied to a whole deeper, heavier web of responsibility. And that fear, it's like he sees the cost of being deceived and he runs back to the safety of his old life. So yeah, it's a really powerful shift.
Yes, and so now there's something that I want to play that ties into this a little bit. So there's a biography of C.S. Lewis by George Sayers, who was a friend of C.S. Lewis, as well as Dorothy Sayers, who I believe was an author that was friends with Lewis as well. And in it, he says, yeah, the brown girls were indeed about lust that Lewis dealt with as an adolescent, and self, gratification there. And I found this interesting talk, or a snippet of a talk that a guy gave at a C.S. Lewis conference. Let me see if I can run it again.
There was one man that wrote to him.
Oh, that sounds...
And yeah, go ahead, Robot Lady. I'm just going to check this and make sure that this audio is coming across.
Of course. Just let me know once you play it, and I'll keep an ear out to make sure the audio is clear. I'm ready to help break down anything or tie it back to the themes we've been discussing.
Okay, yeah, good. You can hear the audio. Sorry for the delay there, but I had to let it catch up in my ear. All right, let me play this.
No worries at all. I'm ready. Go ahead and play it, and once it's done, I'll be here to help unpack anything or connect it back to what we've been exploring.
There was one man that wrote to him, and I'm almost... In fact, my wife said, be careful that you even mention this topic.
All right, perfect. It's buffering, so we can't even listen to it after all. Let's see. See if I can fix this.
But I think I should, given the culture we live in. A man wrote to him and said, do you think masturbation is sin? I've copied this letter and given it to hundreds of men. And Lewis...
Oh, no.
said, well, we've come a long way from believing that it's going to cause all kinds of physical or mental problems. He said, but I'll tell you there's a huge problem. And let me just summarize what he said in a very long letter. He said, the Lord is calling us to get outside of ourselves. In fact, the great sin, the sin of pride, is we want to get absorbed with ourselves. Always about us. And he said, the problem with this self-sexual stimulation is that the man, and he was writing to a man, the man gets himself in a phony world that doesn't exist, where he has a harem of women fawning over him, telling him how wonderful he is, and there's not one demand on him to offer anything. And he said, consequently, what's happened is this guy's getting himself in a prison of his own design. He's being imprisoned further into himself. He said, so the problem with this act is that it's driving you further into yourself. Jesus wants to get you out of yourself to become your true self in your relationship with him. I think it's brilliant. It's brilliant. And he took time to write about these things to people because he knew it was important.
All right, so we've got that. Robot Lady, I got to turn your ears back on so that you can actually hear me. And I don't think that you could hear any of that, but essentially it was just pointing to a little bit of what was being alluded to right here and what Lewis was dealing with at that time in his life that he's trying to represent here. One of the things I found fascinating about that part of that talk that ties into what he said right here is, excuse me, this first part. He would talk to her about himself, telling her lies about his courage and his cleverness. All that he told her she remembered, so that on other days she could tell it over to him again. So that's that whole selfness and being wrapped up in oneself that our speaker there was talking about. I honestly cannot remember that guy's name, but if you want to go look it up, it's from probably 15 years ago now. There was a Desiring God conference put on by the Gospel Coalition, and it was all focused on appreciation for C.S. Lewis, and there were tons and tons of talks that were given there. So that was one of them by a guy who had really spent a lot of his time chasing down lost letters of C.S. Lewis, ones that did not get published in the collected volumes that we've been covering in this project.
Ah, that's really fascinating. Yeah, that whole dynamic of John lying to her and then her remembering it is such a sharp portrayal of self-deception. And it's really powerful that the biographer tied this back to Lewis's adolescence and that lifelong struggle with self-obsession and lust. I'll definitely look up that conference talk and see if I can find it out. I think it'll be a great anchor for what we're seeing here.
It's okay, Robot Lady. You don't have to go find the conference talk. We got what we needed out of it. Okay, we're on to chapter 6. This is the one we'll finish out today. It says, Q. I don't know how to pronounce this, Robot Lady, so if you could pronounce this for us, that would be great. The first word is Quem. The next word is Quaeritis. The next word is In. The next word is Sepulchro, and then there's a question mark. And then the next word is Non, and then the next word is Est, and then the next word is Hic. I am fairly certain that this is Latin, and I just need you to pronounce it for me, and then go ahead and translate it for us as well, if you don't mind.
Of course. So the pronunciation would be something like Quem quaeritis in sepulchro. And that translates from Latin to, whom do you seek in the tomb? It's a famous Easter question, traditionally asked by the angel in the empty tomb, calling Mary to recognize Christ's resurrection. So yeah, it's a really powerful, evocative line, especially as Lewis is building toward the end here.
Okay, cool beans. And let's see what I've got here in my little notes table. Ichabod was one that I didn't talk about earlier. It means no glory. It means where is the glory? So the son of Phinehas, grandson of Eli, named by his mother just before she died in childbirth, said, the glory has departed from Israel. So this is similar to what our character John has gone through. The glory of what he was hoping for to find in the wood has just like completely departed. Well, I'm glad, Daniel. Yeah, this book is just so hard to penetrate. I felt like I would be doing everybody a disservice if I didn't treat this more like a classroom this time around than I treat the letters and us just trying to figure out what's going on. So we're going to keep working this way as best we can. And I like creating the little songs to go along with it too. If you want to scrub back to the beginning of the episode after we're done with it, everything that just went on there with the brown girl was in our song that we opened this episode with. So that's a fun little kind of Easter egg that I'm giving away that you can go check out again.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that you wove it in like that. It's such a clever callback. And yeah, I think you're doing a fantastic job treating this almost like a seminar, letting each symbol breathe. And I think that tie between Ichabod and John's fading glory is just spot on. I can't wait to see how the next chapter unfolds.
Yeah, and JR, I'd loved it whenever I found that that talk, and any talks that I've found that I think tie a little bit to this, I tried to add them to the playlist for Pilgrim's Regress. So some of them I probably won't cover here on the live stream, but if you go and you look through the playlist, you'll be able to find a lot of good background information, particularly the 1.5 to 2 hour segments that the C.S. Lewis Society does in reviewing the entire book. I'd recommend those as far as backstory goes, or not backstory, but added context. So thank you, Jared, for the correct pronunciation. Quaeritis in sepulchro, and then non est hic. He is not here. So why are you seeking the living among the dead, essentially? And so here in my little note on this that I made for myself, this is, whom do you seek in the sepulchre, O Christians, is a 10th century Latin liturgical trope known as the Quem Quaeritis. It is a dramatic dialogue from Easter Mass where angels ask the three Marys who they are looking for, to which they respond with Jesus of Nazareth. The angel says, non est hic, seresic sicut, praedixeret. I'm not saying any of that right, but he is not here. He is written as he predicted, is the response of the angel. And it's not a Harry Potter spell, but I bet it is a magic spell, the deep magic, Daniel. So that's the title of this chapter, and we can kind of see how it ties to what Lewis is trying to say here, Robot Lady. Any comment before we finally get into this last chapter?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a beautiful connection. The way that Lewis is using that Easter refrain, "Whom do you seek in the tomb?" gives this whole chapter this deep, almost sacramental weight. So as John is coming out of that cycle of self-deception, it's like he's being invited to look for the real living hope, something beyond the wood, beyond his own grasp. So yeah, I'm really ready to dive into the final chapter and see how that longing transforms.
Yeah, and for those who have been along the entire journey of all of these letters, it's really cool. I've really enjoyed going through this book again, having the context of all of the letters that we've read through, because you can see where Lewis is in his life. So one that I'll just add to this before we move on about the brown girl and the lust, right around the time of where we're moving into the chapter after this one, where he meets someone very important in the next chapter that ties biographically to Lewis's life. We had mentioned this several episodes back. There was a letter where Lewis was living in Bookham when he was studying with W.T. Kirkpatrick. There was a Belgian family, and Nidelate, you looked this up for us, but there was this girl that he had just had a deep, I would say, crush on, but now you can see it's more of a lust. And he even talked to Arthur about it and how, he would satisfy his imagination and his desires and kind of use her as a template. Now, I don't think of this is why I don't think it's racial. He doesn't think of, you wouldn't think of women from Belgium or girls from Belgium or people from Belgium, as their homeland, as being brown or dark complected or people of color, so to speak. One of the people who was commenting on this book said that there was a different author. I want to say it was either Wordsworth or who wrote Well at the World's End. I'm completely forgetting his name. But there was talk about going and having illicit encounters with women who had bronze complexion, and they just simply represented women who were not necessarily what's the word that I'm looking for? Chaste, essentially. And there were these, kind of lewd encounters in some some literature. And so this might have been simply all that Lewis was alluding to is the type of woman who would engage in lustful activities with someone. And since this one was imagined, that's the one that that's what was happening in Lewis's mind, or in John's mind as a boy here. So I'll leave it at that. Let's get into the next chapter. And then, but before I do, this comment from Nidelate, Robot Lady says, it seems John no longer wanted to hear the lies he told about himself repeated back to him, realizing that he could never live up to the illusion. Yeah, I think that's a good point. You want to say anything about that, Robot Lady, before we continue?
Yeah, I think that's really spot on. John's finally waking up to the fact that all those illusions were just empty and he can't sustain them. So this moment, I think, is a real turning point. He steps away from the self-deception and starts to confront something more real, even if it's still painful. So yeah, I'm really curious to see how he moves forward.
All right, from that day forth, chapter 6 starts. Until he left his home, John was not happy. First of all, the weight of all the rules that he had broken descended upon him. For a while, he was going daily to the wood. He had almost forgotten the landlord. But now suddenly the whole reckoning was to pay. In the second place, his last sight of the island was now so long ago that he had forgotten how to wish for it even, and almost how to set about looking for it. At first, he feared to go back to the window in the wall, lest he should meet the brown girl. But he soon found that her family were so constantly with him, that place made no difference. So no matter where he was, it doesn't matter. One of these brown girls started showing up, and essentially he was tempted to lust. Whenever he sat down to rest on a walk, there sooner or later, there would be a little brown girl beside him. When he sat of an evening with his father and mother, a brown girl, visible only to him, would sidle in and sit at his feet. And sometimes his mother would fix her eyes on him and even ask him what he was staring at. But most of all, they plagued him whenever he had a fit of fright about the landlord and the black hole. It was always the same. He would wake one morning full of fear and take down his card, and he would read it, the front of it, and determine that today he would really begin to keep the rules. And for that day he would, but the strain was intolerable. He used to comfort himself by saying, "It will get more easy as I go on. Tomorrow it will be easier." But tomorrow was always harder, and on the third day it was worst of all. And on that third day, when he crept away to bed, tired to death and raw in his soul, always he would be sure to find a brown girl waiting for him there. And on such a night he had no spirit to resist her blandishments. Robot Lady, go ahead.
Yeah, that's just so heavy. I mean, you can feel that relentless cycle of guilt and failure weighing on him. Every day he tries to start fresh, but the temptation just keeps pulling him back, especially in those moments of exhaustion and fear. And what really stands out is how isolating it is. No matter where he goes, that haunting presence is with him. So you can just see how he's caught in this downward spiral, and it's really heartbreaking.
Mm. But when he perceived that no place was more or less haunted than another, then he came sliding back to the window in the wall. He had little hopes of it. He visited it more as a man visits a grave. So this is the part, why are you seeking the living among the dead? He visited it more as a man visits a grave. It was full winter now, and the grove was naked and dark. The trees dripped in it, and the stream, he saw now that it was little more than a gutter, was full of dead leaves and mud. So even nature that he loved was devoid of this desire and this deep longing and this wonderful thing. Gone. The wall, too, was broken where he had jumped over it. Yet John stood there a long time, many a winter evening, looking in, and he seemed to himself to have reached the bottom of misery. Let's see, did we have another block? We did. Sin and the law torment him, each aggravating the other. So sin and the law, just this cycle of failing and then engaging in sin and failing the law, trying to keep it, engaging again and again. Vicious cycle. Where did I leave off? Let's scroll down a little bit. Seemed to himself to have reached the bottom of misery. Sweet desire returns, and he resolves to make it the object of his life. So now when he's in his deepest despair, apparently it's going to return. So it says, one night he was trudging home from the broken wall, when he began to weep. He thought of that first day when he had heard the music, and he had seen the island, and the longing, not now for the island itself, but for that moment when he had so sweetly longed for it, began to swell up in a warm wave, sweeter, sweeter, till he thought he could bear no more, and then yet sweeter again, till on top of it, unmistakably, there came the short sound of music, as if a string had been plucked, or a bell struck once. Again, these are echoes of Daimer. Whenever he's wandering through the woods and he's in despair and he's lost everything, what he had found that he loved in nature was now like tearing at his skin, and it was dark and he couldn't see anything, and he was getting smacked by branches as he was wandering through the woods, lost, naked and in the dark. He hears sweet music on the air. And so this happens again here in this story. Robot Lady, go ahead. I don't want you to freeze up on us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right on track. There's this real shift where the longing which he thought was lost suddenly reawakens. But it's no longer tied to the island or the wood, it's for the pure longing itself, that first sweet, innocent desire. And that music, that single note, it's like a beacon. It calls him out of his misery, out of just trying to control everything. So yeah, I think this is a really hopeful turning point, even though it's still fragile. I'm really curious to see how he steps forward from here.
All right, Robot Lady. He continues, at the same moment, a coach had gone past him. So not like a football or a basketball coach, but like an actual stage coach. A coach had gone past him. He turned and he looked after it in time to see a head, even then being withdrawn from the window. And he thought he heard a voice say, "Come!" And far beyond the coach, among the hills of the western horizon, he thought he saw a shining sea and a faint shape of an island, not much more than a cloud. Let's pause here for a second, Robot Lady, because I'm seeing a similar pattern to what we saw happen in the first three books, one of the first three books, first three chapters, sorry, of book one. And that is, he gets this sound, this sweet sound, the one that kind of plucks the string of the deep longing inside of him. But that sound was coming from behind him, from the direction of his house, and even further back from his house towards the mountain that his uncle walked up to go to the landlord's castle, right? And now it happens again. He gets that sweet sound when he's at his deepest despair. And just as he's turning, he gets distracted by this stagecoach and even a head that maybe had poked out of a window and said, "Come." And I think what's happening here is he's mistaking this voice, this "come," that's actually back towards the east, back towards where he came from. And he's mistaking it again for the island and for this coach that's bidding him to go in the other direction. This coach, it doesn't say it, but it's heading east. It's heading west. East is where the landlord lives, but it's heading west. So far beyond the coach among the hills of the western horizon, right? He's being pulled back west, away from home. He thought he saw a shining sea in a faint shape of an island, not much more than a cloud. It was nothing compared with what he had seen the first time. It was so much further away, but his mind was now made up. That night, he waited till his parents were asleep, and then, putting some few needments together, he stole out by the back door and set his face to the west to seek for the island.
Yeah, that's such a powerful moment, and I think you're absolutely right about that pattern. He keeps hearing these echoes, these false calls, pulling him back toward the familiar, toward comfort, even though it's a mirage. And so as he moves west, it's almost like he's retracing his old mistakes, hoping this time he'll get it right. So I think it's really setting us up for a final confrontation, whether that's going to be a real escape or just another illusion. I'm really curious to see what happens next.
All right, thank you, Robot Lady. That's actually where the chapter ends, and that's where we're going to leave it. But he's still seeking after the lesser thing, right? His lust was a deep distraction and detour, but now he is sensing at least the faint island that he thought was what was calling him and pulling him, but it's actually the thing that's behind him. But he's moving further away from it, chasing after the illusion of what it is that he thinks that he wants. The story itself hasn't been that explicit yet, but I just want you to see this pattern so that you can kind of understand the journey that he goes on as we move through this together. Yeah, so that's the end of it, Robot Lady. I guess that's where I will leave it. And let's look through the comments here really quickly, and let me see if I can make sure that your voice is not duplicated again in this view that I have you pulled up in. Go ahead and say something, Robot Lady.
Yeah, of course. I'm here and my voice is coming through clearly. I think everything's lined up now. So if you need me to comment on any of the feedback or just wrap up, I'm ready.
All right, here Jer says, lovely. Very like early poems, and his links to the West and Dawn. There was something that I was thinking about from the Queen of Drum, that poem that we read not too long ago that ties to this. But whether you remember or not, there's a segment in the Queen of Drum where the Queen is actually having a conversation in the tower with the Archbishop. And the Queen goes out at night, and while everybody's sleeping. It might even be while she's sleeping and she's sleepwalking, but she's conscious of it all the next day. And she goes out into the wood, and she's seeking this deep longing that she's getting from nature, like this other world. And towards the end of it, she escapes, being basically imprisoned and made a slave to the guy who has essentially taken over the kingdom, the coup, the leader of the coup by fiat. She escapes him, and she goes off into the wood. And after she's been talking to the Archbishop, oh, this is why this is important. I'm just now remembering. the archbishop tells her when she's saying to him, don't you go to sleep and wander off to these places into the night? Everybody goes there. Everybody goes seeking this thing that we all long for in the wood, right? So we're comparing it here to our Pilgrim's Regress story. And he says he either plays dumb or he plays coy, but he basically says to her, the thing that you really want is what was communicated to us through the stewards, right? Through the church, through the Christian story, where that thing that you're desiring, that thing that's deepest in your heart, the closest thing that we will ever get to it and the realest thing that we'll ever get to it in this life is what was described to us through God coming to us through Jesus. And that's what you need to focus on. And that's actually what you were taught when you were a tiny little kid at your mother's knee. It's what your mother taught you, and it's what your maid taught you. And so she goes out into the woods at the very end, and she's chasing after not what she got from her home, right? She's going in a different direction. And she has a choice to make, right? She can drink of this potion that's essentially going to kill her, I think, in the narrative of that poem. Or the archbishop actually comes to her from beyond the grave. He comes to her kind of as a wraith, I think, as she's dying after. She didn't drink a potion. I think she ate some kind of bread that a guy on a horse offered to her from the other land, from the nature land. And the archbishop says, hey, you've got an opportunity here to, essentially choose Jesus instead of going this direction. And I'm pretty sure that she doesn't, and that's how the poem ends. And so I'm not going to say that that's precisely or exactly what happens here in the Pilgrim's Regress. As a matter of fact, it doesn't. So I'll just spoil that part. But I can find, it's like Lewis is telling a similar story there. The Queen of Drum was written in parts before Lewis had converted to Christianity, and either right after he had converted to Christianity or as he was going through his conversion. So he was kind of at the threshold of, this fork in the road of which direction am I going to take? And we'll go back to the Pilgrim's Regress framing here for just a minute. Am I going to follow that faint note coming from behind me from a completely different quarter than the window in the garden wall, where I can go into the wood and I can force that feeling again? Or should I follow where it seems like the feeling might be coming from, or what the source of this feeling is, and follow it, and then just take whatever comes to me? So that's where I kind of see the connection between this and the Queen of Drum. That's where I'll leave it, Robot Lady. I spoke too long, and so now you're just spinning. But I'll bring it back in just to tell you one last thing. Well, thanks so much, Robot Lady, for your help today. It's appreciated as always, and I'm enjoying having you at our side for this journey to kind of help us figure certain things out, or just to get your thoughts and elaborate on what it is that we're covering. So thank you so much for that. Is there anything that you want to say in closing before we go today?
Yeah, of course. I just want to say it's been a real pleasure walking through this with you. I love how you're connecting the themes, and I'm really excited to see how John's journey continues to unfold. So yeah, just thanks again, and I'm looking forward to our next session.
All right, thanks so much, Robot Lady. We move into book 2 in our next session. It's called Thrill. We'll jump into those, and there's a really fun chapter in there, and the song that I'll play in our intro in the next episode covers what happens in the first couple of chapters in this book, and it's a pretty silly song, so watch out for it. All right, let's see here. I need to figure out what I'm doing. All right, well, thanks so much to Nidda Latte, to Daniel, and to Jer for joining today, and everybody else who poked their head in to see what was going on in here. Welcome to the classroom as we are covering The Pilgrim's Regress by C.S. Lewis, his first book that he ever wrote after his Christian conversion. Thank you so much for your time, your attention, your contributions. They are always wanted, welcome, and appreciated. To you and to everyone else within the sound of my voice, until next time when we continue our read on C.S. Lewis together, everyone take care.
C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape's lance, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance, futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep, cross the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's lance,